Talofalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. Olo'ingoa o Susana Suisuiki. Coming up.
More than 200 other people who were injured at that night, with 77 of them just were admitted to the hospital.
Manus Island murder witness wants justice. Also,
people feel that they'll be forced to sell out because they're desperate.
Maui fire sheds light on Hawaii's housing crisis. And later, the people of Banaban are seeking a formal apology from the New Zealand government. The roommates of a refugee bludgeoned to death in an Australian-run detention centre on Manus Island 9 years ago will not stop fighting for justice. The Australian government has finally recognised the suffering and misery inflicted on Reza Barati's family by reaching a confidential settlement. But Reza's friend Benham Sattar, who witnessed Mr Barati's murder, told Lydia Lewis it doesn't go far enough.
Actually, I am very sad that this is confidential. They are not publishing it to people know what happened. You know, we need to know what settlement they reached on. Because it wasn't just Reza. We had more than 200 other people who were injured at that night, with 77 of them just were admitted to the hospital. It wasn't just Reza. One guy was shot. One guy lost his eyes, his eye that is still in Australia suffering. Other people, I am very aware of Australian brutality about trying to wash their hands off the crimes they do in other places. But it is, Reza's case is not something that can be, wiped out of the history. I will follow it up. As a person who testified in court and risked his life and got many threats to be killed not to go to court, I will say not for Reza, for other people I will follow up.
What happened to Reza?
Actually, he was murdered by expatriate and locals at our doorway in MA6. Room number was 12, and he was escaping from telephone room because when they attacked us and started shooting, Reza was in the telephone room. He went there to call for help, but unfortunately, they got him on the stairs and. First Joshua, who is on the run at the moment, he was, just in jail for 3 years, and after he escaped. But, Louis, he did his time. So Joshua beat him in the head, and when he fell down, Australian expatriates, started, kicking him in the head with their boots, and not the one, kicking him in the body. Everyone was aiming for his head. And after, 15, I gave all their names and I details because I was interpreting in the months before for all this security. I would know all of them. I have been dealing with securities for many months before that. And because there was not much people who spoke English, it had to be me, and I knew all of them. But 15 people attacked Reza and beat him in the head, but it was just only two locals who were charged for it. And the Australian officer, two of them that I identified in camp after, when Wilson took over from G4S, they came back and working actually in the camp.
Now, I just want to talk a little bit about Reza. I want to know who he was to you, what kind of person he was and how you remember him.
Actually, Reza was my best friend, my roommate, and a person that we get to know each other in Indonesia. And we were about 2 weeks or more than 3 weeks in the same, hiding place in Indonesia. And, we were from the same language back, we were both Iranian and both Kurdish Iranian. And during the time in Indonesia, I got to know him, and he was such a nice guy. He was very like a giant person in body, but with a very, beautiful heart that always, during the time in camp, he was doing his best to motivate others to, take people to gym. And, he was a bodybuilder, and he was teaching others. But for me, he was like my best friend and a brother to me. We were so close. I was teaching him English. I had English classes. I was running English classes in camp. But for Reza, I was, teaching him in our room every day, 1 to 2 hours, and, practicing with him English. And it was very unfortunate that, he was murdered in that, February attack.
You say you knew the guards, you knew their faces, and you even identified New Zealand expatriates that you say were involved, but only 2 people, not New Zealanders, not Australians, were prosecuted. What's your message to the New Zealand government?
Actually, for the New Zealand government, I personally don't have any problem with the government, but these people who New Zealand, sent to Australia, and Australia want them to beat up and murder my roommate. I would like the New Zealand government to bring these people to the court and ask them, if you're a New Zealander, how did you contribute in a murder that Australia wanted you to do? How could you beat a refugee that is on the ground in the head with your boots, and you see that blood is coming out of his head, blood is like showering from his face. I don't know who broke his nose, that he did all his anger on Reza's, and he was beating him, with his boots on his head. I would love that New Zealand government could bring at least justice, at least a couple questions from this guy. Why did you murder a person? Murdering that person, the Reza is gone since 2014, He was 23 years old. He had lots of, hopes and wishes to achieve, but he was deprived of it because an Australian and New Zealand expatriates, and that's a very big shame.
After everything that you've been through and still are, what would bring you peace, if anything?
Actually, the real peace, nothing, because I have already lost like 7 years of being in detention and 3 or more years, which I could, in this time, I shouldn't have been dealing with, PTSD in France. I should have been able to, get on with my life. It's 10 years that I lost with nothing can bring it back. But what that can, ideally makes me a little happy is the life of these people who were tortured by Australian government, these around 3,000 people who were sent to offshores in Manus and Nauru. If I see they are happy in their life, I will be happy. But unfortunately, majority of them are suffering, no matter in US, in Australia, or New Zealand, or Canada, or in Europe. I'm in contact with majority of them. They are suffering mentally. Many are suffering physically as well, but there is no exception in the mental problems that everyone is facing now. There are people in US that from us that are sleeping in the streets. In Papua New Guinea, there is still like 70 people left there that every day, life for them is a torture. They are just, trying to get to another day. A day that I see all these people can, get on and laugh, that will bring me peace.
RNZ Pacific has contacted both the New Zealand and Australian governments for comment. New Zealand's Foreign Affairs Ministry is yet to respond. A spokesperson for Australia's Home Affairs Department says the department does not comment on the details of confidential legal settlements. There are concerns in Hawaii of predatory land buying as recent wildfires have left many locals in dire financial straits. The disaster has shed light on Hawaii's housing crisis. According to a report this year by Hawaii Senate's Housing Committee, an average of 14,000 Hawaiians leave the state every year, and over 6,000 are homeless. Finau Fonua has more.
Homeowners have been reached out by investors and realtors offering to buy their land, and this is disgusting.
Maui resident Tiare Lawrence, who lost her home to the wildfires, vented her frustration on MSNBC, accusing out-of-state developers of exploiting a disaster which has left thousands of Lahaina residents homeless and in a state of financial desperation.
We just want to make sure that people around the world understand our situation and know that Lahaina is not for sale.
Hawaii was already in a housing crisis before the disaster occurred. The state is notorious for high mortgage and rent rates. In fact, it was only last month that Hawaii's Governor Josh Green declared a housing emergency, announcing plans to build 50,000 homes before 2025. One Lahaina evacuee, John Crew, told RNZ Pacific, local property owners were already struggling to keep up with costs before the wildfires destroyed their homes.
People feel that they'll be forced to sell out because they're desperate, and then that will mean that there's no place for them to come back to. Certain people might take advantage of the disaster to gain more real estate because it's a vacation destination. People like to buy vacation property, and that drives up the cost of everything. That was something that should have been addressed years ago.
Governor Green says he's organized attorneys to assist local landowners. On Tuesday, the governor even suggested that the Hawaiian state purchase land from Lahaina. That comment caused a social media backlash from critics who accused the administration of protecting the interests of lucrative hotels and tourism developers, blamed by many for making Hawaii's property markets so expensive. On Wednesday, Governor Green dismissed the criticism. He said he was committed to protecting the land.
Some people took out of context a comment I made about purchasing land. That is to protect it for our local people so that it's not stolen by people on the mainland. So I've asked my Attorney General to watch for predatory practices. We'll also be raising incredible amounts of resources to protect us financially so that none of that land does fall into anyone else's hands. This is not ever about the government getting land. This is the people's land, and the people will decide what to do with Lahaina.
But many are doubtful. In the days following the disaster, thousands of Lahaina evacuees were forced to live in gymnasiums, churches, community shelters, and their cars, while Maui's many hotels and resorts remained open to tourists. It was only this week that Governor Green announced he had arranged for more than 500 rooms to be made available for evacuees to use. Lahaina evacuee and native Hawaiian Kanani Higby told RNZ Pacific she had few choices but to leave Hawaii for other states where costs of living are much cheaper. Lahaina evacuee John Crew said he prayed the community, which had existed for generations in Lahaina, would remain intact.
People might have a tendency to want to leave the island and go someplace else, and I think that we should build it so that people can come back and have a vibrant society here, not just be a tourist destination.
According to Hawaii's Senate Housing Committee, one resident leaves the state every 36 minutes.
The Banaban community are continuing to seek justice for what happened on the island and its people over a century ago. In the early 1900s, Banaban, or Ocean Island, was mined for phosphate, resulting in forced relocation of its people to settle in Rambi Island in Fiji. The extractive mining project, led by the British Phosphate Company, which New Zealand was a part of, is a history that is little known or forgotten about. But the Banabans of today say they still live with the grief and trauma brought on by the destructive practice. To move forward and heal, they're calling on the New Zealand government to deliver a formal apology. Joining me to talk about Banaban and their journey towards restoration is Rambi Island community volunteer Ray Bantis. Talafalava Ray, why should New Zealand apologise to Banaban, seeing as they weren't the only country involved in mining the island?
Yeah, I think as part of the public apology that we've been asking the New Zealand government last February when we were in Auckland with a group of Banaban activists, dancers, and some of our representatives from the Rambi Council of Leaders. part of the ask was how could they contribute back to the communities, to majority of the Banaban people who now reside in Rambi as a result of the forced relocation. And New Zealand is in the best position, to step up with facilitating this public apology like they've done for other Pacific communities who are affected by the down rates. And we would love to see their leadership in also just stepping up and seeing where they could potentially assist our very marginalized communities with supporting education, scholarship, health, because for over 70 years the development on Rambi has really been restricted to the fact that Banaban development is really falling in the crack of two countries, Fiji and Kiribati at this present time. So we're hoping with the crisis, the ongoing acute crisis of water shortage, food shortage on Banaban in Kiribati, with the current development that we have on Rambi, we're also asking in this petition if they could just come and investigate and see how the Banabans are doing now and what are the ways that they could, assist the communities that are living on Rambi at this time.
You've brought up a really interesting topic on the dawn raids. And yes, the New Zealand government has apologised to the Pacific community for that event. They've also offered an apology to the Samoan community for how they poorly handled the Spanish influenza outbreak that happened hundreds of years ago. How does it make you feel to know that there's been recognition for that, but they haven't apologised yet for what they've done to Banaban?
Yeah, so I am the third generation Banaban living on Rambi, and I've got nephews and nieces. It's the fourth generation that have, made Fiji their second home. And all the time while I was growing up, although I did not face and experience the forced relocation, it was during the 15th celebration every year on Rambi that we get to learn about the experiences that our grandfathers and great-grandparents have to experience in the process of forced relocation. And for reasons and stories shared like these that makes us very sad and very, and we experience the extent of trauma and grief, although we were not the ones that experienced that forced relocation. And I was in New Zealand at the time when the discussions around dawn raids was happening, and then I was in Rambi when the dawn raids apology took place. And for me as a community that was uprooted from our ancestral home because of extractive industries and phosphate mining, I think that's what our community needs right now. It's one of any other countries that contributed to the exploitation of our lands to really step up and take the leadership to apologize, to take public apology so that our communities can start healing. And apologies in the sense that, they need to revisit and relook at how the Banaban are thriving as peoples and as communities in two states.
What will it mean for you to have New Zealand acknowledge their past actions?
It means a lot to us. As young people, it means a lot to us because we can never move forward as a community with the grief and the trauma and the experiences that we carry from our past. And for us as young people right now, we feel that our story has been forgotten. No one country that were involved heavily in the mining of our island home have ever incorporated Banaban history in the curriculum. And it matters because as young people, and I talk on behalf of many young people on our island, identity crisis has become a big issue for many of us, and the many more reasons why this apology is very important for people, so that we can start the healing process and progressing as a community to ensure that we develop our island home and our people as a healed community. Because as communities that are healed from these experiences, or at least in the process of healing, can only then move forward to do many things to develop their island homes and to feel that they have a sense of dignity as a community.
That's Pacific Waves for today. Don't forget you can listen back on rnzi.com/programs. We're also on Apple, Spotify and iHeartRadio podcasts. From myself and the team here at RNZ Pacific, Tō whāsoi fua.